on with QNT is the SIA, right? This has recently turned into Nexi, but this is one of the biggest giants underneath Europe. So I'll try to explain this to you guys in a very simple manner. And what does it mean for Quant? How is it? Who is SIA, Nexi? And what does this mean for the integration and the adoption of this asset? So in Europe, right? This is really focused on Europe. What would happen in Europe if every ATM stopped? What would happen if every bank transfer failed? What would happen if every payroll became frozen or SEPA payments crashed? What about the instant payments in Europe if that was gone? Cross-border movement of money, gone. The RTGSs, the real-time gross settlements between banks, what if that went offline, right? What if Europe was in a position where there was no cards, no payments, and no banking? Europe would be on fire within hours. So let me ask you something. Who do you think actually runs all of that? Some people would assume it's Visa in Europe. Some people would assume it's MasterCard. Some people would assume that it's the banks themselves. But behind this, behind the European financial floorboard is a company that most people have never heard of, and it's SIA, S-I-A. Now it's called Nexi. They merged into a company called Nexi, N-E-X-I. But they are quite literally the shadow company of Europe. It's the plumbing, it's the wiring, it's really the back end infrastructure that's holding everything up in Europe. So if Visa and MasterCard are the logos that you guys are seeing in Europe, SIA Nexi is really the plumbing that's within the walls. And I want to begin with this and Quant's integration in with it. Because this is who Quant connected blockchain to. Okay, this is where Quant's overledger actually touches the financial rails. So for decades in Europe and really all across the world, these banks didn't have their own pipes. They didn't have their own pipes, and why would they? It was very expensive. So SIA connects to thousands and thousands of banks. Kind of the same way that you would actually plug your phone charger into the wall, right? So SIA or SIA became the electrical wall outlet of Europe. Like you plug it in, you process payments, and you move money. Done. They made banking infrastructure very easy for their clients. Now because every bank in Europe practically plugs into SIA. SIA really became the hub for SEPA payments, credit cards, ATM networks, instant payments, RTGS, government payments, interbank transfers, and they have connections to over 1,000 banks. This is huge. It's absolutely huge. But here's the problem, okay? All of the discussions about blockchain adoption, tokenization, DLT settlement, real-time money, CBDCs, none of that matters unless the institutions that are sitting at the center of the financial system can actually use those technologies safely, right? We talk about how big trust and safety is in this new financial era. You can't just walk into SIA and say, "Hey guys, please, can you? I want to recode my entire banking infrastructure to use Ethereum." They won't do that. Absolutely not. They're not gonna completely throw out 40 years of financial code. They're certainly not gonna risk any of the downtime that it would take to integrate in Ethereum. And I'm not picking on Ethereum. This could be any chain you want to plug in, but they're not gonna risk any downtime to change the 40 years of the financial systems that they've been using to now upload in with blockchain technology. So banks, they don't move fast, right? We know that banks prefer safety. So SIA had a very big challenge, and it sounded almost impossible to do, right? They were basically trying to figure out how can we explore blockchain without touching anything, right? How can we explore blockchain without risking anything? How can we have all of these banks in the world connect into our networks? And that's a really big checklist to try to check off, right? It's almost impossible to think of those requirements, because in order for them to do that, they couldn't have any downtime of the current financial system. There couldn't be no rewriting any of the financial code. They would be risking billions of dollars. They would have to completely retrain staff on how to use Ethereum or Hedera or XRP. They weren't doing that. They weren't turning anything off. They couldn't break anything that has already been working for 40 years. So SIA came in and they basically said, well, let's see if we can actually test the future, right? Let's see if we can keep everything from the past perfectly intact. And crypto was pretty much a solution to this, right? Crypto has kind of always been saying, hey, look over here, build on our chain, switch to us, rewire everything, join our ecosystems. And the banks looked at them like, absolutely not, because of all of the risks that they had to do. Well, here came Quant, right, with SIA. Quant walked in with an absolute, complete different strategy, a complete different mindset. So instead of saying use our chain, they basically said that you don't need a new chain. You don't need to migrate. You don't need to rewire anything. And you don't need to risk anything. Quant basically came in and they said, we'll connect everything that you have to any blockchain that you want to test without you touching your existing legacy infrastructure. Do you understand the magnitude of that solution, right? Everyone else was trying to convince the banks to join their blockchain. And Quant is not a blockchain. I just want to be clear, right? Quant built the system that lets the banks stay exactly where they are and still access every blockchain. SIA didn't want a complete new ecosystem. They wanted a bridge, right, into blockchain. They wanted a translator into blockchain. They wanted a layer that's kind of above the fragmentation of blockchain. And for them, it was Quant's Overledger technology. That was it. So what did they do? They ran a full pilot. It wasn't a test net. It wasn't a PowerPoint. It wasn't a brochure saying, hey, look at what we could do. No, they ran a real integration in with SIA, with LACChain, which is basically SIA's like private DLT environment. And that already runs across 580 nodes. Okay, so LACChain basically runs over 580 nodes. So it means that Quant didn't have to build a bridge. They were able to plug directly into the back end of Europe's financial technology stack. And once they included Overledger into this, every bank on every rail with every network can actually touch and integrate in with blockchain through one connection, which was Overledger, which is Quant. Not 1,000 different integrations, not 20,000 different bridges, not 50,000 different means to plug in, just one. And this is something that no other crypto project on the planet has ever done. Okay, this was one integration. Not Ethereum, not Solana, not Ripple, not Hyperledger, not Corda, not Avalanche, not Polkadot. Nobody has ever touched infrastructure to this size and importance. This was Quant. This was probably one of the opening moments where Quant was actually proving that they can bring blockchain into the banking system without breaking any of the legacy banking code. Right? They left it exactly the same, and the banks loved it. The banks didn't want any disruption. The banks just wanted continuity between it, and Quant delivered that continuity with a promise. And basically, the moment that Quant plugged into SIA, they didn't just use one institution. They connected it to every institution downstream. Basically, you would connect the hub, and you automatically all spoke that same type of language. So Quant kind of created that ability for banks all across Europe to test tokenized money, to settle with DLT, to issue assets, to move digital value, to experiment with CBDCs, to use smart contracts, to have cross-chain settlement between all different types of ledgers. And it allowed them to connect to both public and private ledgers, which was huge. And they were able to do that without changing anything. Yes, just like a translator. Exactly. It was infrastructure, and it was pretty invisible. Like they didn't even realize that this was the technology that allowed them to do it. They just said, oh my God, well, now we can settle with any asset that we want. So people are still arguing about TPS. Quant is plugging blockchains into the central wiring of the European banking system. And this was absolutely one of the biggest things that we found. Now, on the Quant's website, we have another thing called LACChain. All right. So now that we went over kind of one of the biggest importance of the European backbone, which is SIA, LACChain comes in, and this was they basically went all the way on the other side of the world to test to see what it is that they can do. So basically, Latin America. This is Latin America, and they basically needed interoperability, and Quant became the solution for them. They basically came in, and Latin America had a big issue, right? The issue was that there wasn't a centralized infrastructure. Everything across Latin America was very fragmented, and look, fragmentation was 23 countries, right? Fragmentation is still a very big issue. Look, you even see Quant in here on the website. But fragmentation is still a big issue. You have thousands of different networks. You have thousands of you got hundreds or dozens of different countries. You have dozens of public and private systems, kind of all growing their solutions in all these different directions. So with LACChain, it allowed the ability to, everyone was basically trying to build on blockchains, but nobody was building it together. They had no means of orchestrating anything in Latin America together. And here comes Quant, right? Quant came in, and they basically solved everything. They basically connected everything. So this is from Jean Pesme from the World Bank. She's the Global Director of Finance. She said, I really think that cross-border payments is the next agenda, the next frontier. An ambition project called LACChain is designed to help Latin American businesses bank better and has the potential to be transformative. LACChain uses blockchain and integrates it into the core banking infrastructure. Gilbert Verdian comes in and he says, real-time digital assets make getting paid instantaneously. All the users need is a phone. Basically programmable money. Not only will this make it easier for people to send and receive payments, but more importantly, it allows them to access new markets because LACChain is cross-border. So the LACChain project began in 2018. Fix that for you guys. And Quant joined them in 2021 to solve the problem around cross-border payments, domestic payments, and remittances using its Overledger blockchain platform. Quant spearheaded the blockchain ISO TC 307. Yes, ISO TC 307 is the international standard for blockchain and DLT technology, and Gilbert Verdian, the CEO of Quant, created that. This was adopted by 57 countries and organizations worldwide and solved interoperability with the creation of one of the world's first blockchain-agnostic API gates, Overledger, as it does not require the use of specialized programming languages. So Quant comes in, and basically it fits into two different types of environments, right? You have, as we've seen with SIA, it's the centralized systems, which is Europeans' banking rails. But then you also have like this decentralization, like Latin America's ecosystems, because there was so many different countries that were involved with this. And One of the biggest things that I think LACChain did was it just basically allowed a collaboration, an interconnected conduit between all of them. So LACChain isn't, it's not a crypto. It's not like a country. It's not a private company. It was like a movement. It was a correlation. It was a coordinated blueprint for modernizing digital payments across the entire Latin American industry. And there was a lot of people that were involved into this, right? Into LACChain. You have Citibank, MIT was involved with this. You have national governments involved into this. You had public sector institutions that were involved into this. And they were basically trying to solve the decade-old infrastructure that they had. All of these different Latin American countries had fragmented financial systems. The cross-border transactions were very slow. They had very small financial inclusion, meaning a lot of people didn't actually have the means to plug into the financial system. There was like weak access to a majority of, I guess, digital access. There wasn't much digital accessibility in Latin American, and they didn't really have any type of standards, any technological standards. So LACChain comes in, and it was pretty much meant to act like a foundation for the entire Latin American industry trying to adopt and come on to DLT technology. And this was a big leap for traditional infrastructure to go straight into using DLT technology. Every country in Latin America started building their own blockchain networks, but none of them matched, none of them aligned, and none of them actually communicated with each other. It was a big problem. Colombia had one approach. Peru had a different approach. You had the Caribbeans. They had a whole nother approach. Central America tried something else. Public agencies were using one ledger, but private institutions were using another one, right? Banks were experimenting with one chain, and governments were experimenting with a completely different chain. None of them were communicating or working together. They were basically all kind of working in their own island. There was a big problem of isolation. And the issue with it was that they built too many systems. You basically had a huge mesh of permission chains, public chains, private networks, all different type of open source DLTs, local government blockchains. There was identity networks in there, payment rails, smart contract platforms. It was just a mess of shit. And none of them were able to communicate with each other. None of them were unified. There was no interoperability between them. None of them actually connected to any type of cross-border. So it was like as if Latin America kind of built thousands of highways, but none of them had like on and off ramps to get onto each other. So the question that LACChain basically had to ask is how do we turn all of these isolated islands, right? These digital islands into more of a unified ecosystem. And it was a very different approach from what the SIA's challenge was, right? The SIA needed blockchain without disrupting its current financial infrastructure. Well, the LACChain needed blockchain without the fragmentation. So both of them ended up pointing to interoperability. That's exactly what they needed. But completely different opposite sides from the problems that they had. So here comes LACChain, and they went searching, but they weren't looking for a layer one, okay? They weren't looking for a new blockchain. They weren't looking for an ecosystem to migrate to. They needed something that can sit above it all, right? They needed something that could unify everything, that could standardize communications between traditional systems and blockchains. They needed something that could comply with all of the different governments' regulations. They needed something that can ensure identity and having programmable permissioned money. They needed something that could work with both public and private chains, and they needed something that can plug into all these different countries and support all of these different institutions. And that's not the kind of problem that you can solve with one chain. You know, they didn't really want to replace what they had existed, but they just wanted to connect everything that had already existed in Latin America. And that's why Quant became the interoperability layer for LACChain. Quant didn't come in there and tell them that they had to switch chains. Quant didn't ask the governments to abandon their infrastructure. Quant didn't ask the banks to rewrite their code. They didn't try to sell them on a new network. Quant pretty much came in and said, you got it. Keep whatever you built. We'll help you connect it. And that's exactly what Latin America needed. So you were connecting countries, right? You were connecting countries. You weren't just connecting chains together. So with Overledger, LACChain could basically let different nations, different countries exchange data. They would let banks send cross-border transactions between the countries. They would let identity systems kind of communicate with each other. They would let the tokenized assets in these countries move between different networks. And this was at a very different scale than what most people in crypto were able to imagine, right? When we talk about interoperability, some people are just talking about networks, but here comes LACChain connecting countries. Most people in crypto, when they talk about interoperability, they say, how do we bridge chain A to chain B? Quant and LACChain was coming in, and they're saying, how do we bridge countries together? And it was huge. It was absolutely transformative. It's one thing to connect blockchain to blockchain, but it's another thing to connect Colombia's digital identity network to Panama's government layers, or Peru's financial system rails, to the Caribbean's remittances, to MIT's oversights, or Citibank's cross-border payments. It was it was honestly a huge story. It was just interoperability on a completely different scale that connected countries and legacy systems. And look, you guys can underestimate Quant if you'd like, but this is a project that doesn't have a narrative that's attached to it. It doesn't have a hype wave. It doesn't have a new chain to launch. It doesn't. Well, it may be coming, but right now it doesn't have staking rewards. It's not tied to some DeFi dashboards. But institutions don't choose the tech for the hype, and we know that, right? They choose the tech that can solve a problem, and LACChain was a massive problem. It was pretty amazing to see what Overledger was able to come in and solve for them, right? Cross-border interoperability, regulatory compliance, identity verification, permissioned access, massive. And they chose Quant. They basically chose Quant because of the infrastructure, right? The architecture, Quant's architecture, came in and solved fragmentation between countries. The architecture ended cross-border workflows. The architecture allowed a multi-country digital ecosystem to function like it was one interconnected thing. And what did this do for the region? Well, Latin America has, I believe, like almost 700 million people, and millions of them are unbanked. Okay, the cross-border payments are very expensive in Latin America. The means to achieve identity is very inconsistent, and the government services are even slower than they are in the United States. And they needed a way to modernize it. And the solution wasn't that everyone has to use the same blockchain. The solution basically came in and they said everyone has to be able to connect to this financial system. And Quant was the means for them to do that. So once Quant was plugged into the Latin America, Sarah, thank you so much. Once Quant was able to plug into the infrastructure, it became embedded in it. It became the foundation for it. It became the interoperability standard for it. Not because it's a token, not because it's a crypto, but because it solved a real-world problem at a multinational scale. So that's why LACChain matters, because we talk about modernizing without risk, and now we talk about modernizing without fragmentations. So I'd like to go a little bit more into Quant's partnership with Oracle. I don't know if you guys ever heard of this company, but they are big. They are absolutely big. So if SIA or Nexi was the plumbing behind the European banking, and LACChain was the blueprint for connecting different countries together, modernizing their financial system, Oracle comes in and they do something completely different with Quant, right? Oracle is basically like an operating system for some of the world's largest institutions. The company Oracle, they basically run government databases, they run financial systems, they run healthcare records, supply chain management, logistic networks. They even do like insurance systems, tax infrastructure, corporate accounting. They kind of connect everything, right? So if you've ever went to the DMV or went to the hospital or ordered something online, Sarah, thank you so much, or swiped your debit card or applied to go to college or received a paycheck, you probably interacted with Oracle without even knowing it. And that's what makes them so important, because when a company this deeply embedded into like operations on a global scale starts to integrate in with blockchain capabilities, you better start to pay attention what it is that they're adopting, because it changes absolutely everything. So I think one of the biggest misunderstandings in this industry is what enterprises want and what they don't want, right? Enterprises want blockchain. They want to tokenize. They want DLT. Enterprises want real-time settlement, and they certainly want interoperability. But what the enterprises don't want is they don't want to run nodes. They don't want to hire blockchain engineers or developers. They don't want to choose between competing chains. They certainly don't want to rewrite their entire system. They don't want to upgrade their databases. They don't want to risk downtime. They don't want to break compliance, and they don't want production to stop flowing. So the enterprises only are adopting the technologies that are proven, that are compliant, that are stable, that can integrate in with existing systems with no risk, with no downtime, with no complexity. They want reliability. And our current crypto ecosystem is pretty much anything but fucking reliable, guys. It really is like the early days of the internet, right? You have chain forks, you have chains that are shutting down. Some of these chains are rebooting. Some chains are requiring different migrations. Some chains are not compatible. And banks can't operate like that. Enterprises can't operate like that. Governments definitely cannot operate like that. So how do you give enterprises access to the benefits of blockchain without any of the blockchain headaches? Well, that's exactly what Quant does with Oracle. All right. So Oracle didn't integrate in with Quant because of a token narrative. Right? They didn't sit there and go, oh my God, Quant has 14.8 million coins, so if we use this, we can pump the price up. They didn't do that. They certainly didn't do that. They integrated with Quant because Overledger does something that the enterprise software needs. It removes the enterprises to have to run nodes or have to take on risk or have to hire people in the blockchain space or increase their infrastructure or possibly introduce downtime. So you had a single integration with Quant that allows you to connect to any blockchain that you want. So Oracle made Quant the interoperability engine that allows any Oracle customer to connect to any blockchain without any blockchain knowledge. Okay? That's fucking architecture. You know, you made blockchain available to tens of thousands of organizations with one move, with one partnership, with one integration. Enterprises and governments, a lot of them rely on Oracle. A lot of them. Banks, insurance, hospitals, retailers, companies, manufacturers, they're running Oracle systems. And when Oracle adds Quant, Oracle is basically telling those institutions, hey, you don't need to build blockchain. You don't need to build a blockchain team. You don't need to choose your favorite chain. You don't need to manage the nodes. You don't have to change any of your original code. Just click this, and your existing Oracle stack can now connect to any blockchain via Quant's Overledger. That's it. One click for these partners unlocks tokenized assets. It unlocked secure messaging. It unlocked multi-chain orchestration. It unlocked identity flows. It unlocked automated settlement, cross-ledger. All of that. They were able to access all of the benefits of blockchain without knowing anything about it. And I hope that you guys understand how big this is, because we're living in a world where everybody's scrambling to get adoption by convincing the developers to build on their chain, right? But Oracle flipped that entire script on its head. They basically came in and they said, you don't need to build a chain. You don't need to switch chains. You don't even need to know what chain you're using. Just use Oracle's integration, and Overledger is going to orchestrate everything for you behind the scenes. That's how you get enterprises to move in to blockchain adoption without them actually realizing what it is, right? Oracle's partnership with Quant is huge. Oracle is already trusted in enterprise environments. Quant didn't need to come in and restructure any of their technology. Quant just needed to come in and plug the systems that were already trusted to blockchain. And Oracle came in and basically became that bridge, I guess, for them. It was massive, absolutely massive. Let's see if I can go into the next thing for you guys. What do we have here? The BIS. Ooh, this one is good. The Bank of International Settlements and the Bank of England for Project Rosalind. Did I miss one? Digital pound? Am I looking for the digital pound? I'm sorry, guys. Give me a minute. How are you guys liking this breakdown so far? Put a 1 in the chat if you guys are learning something. Yeah, so we got the bank collaborates with the BIS and the Bank of England on Project Rosalind. Okay, this one was massive. Basically, it's all about CBDCs with this one. Okay, central bank digital currencies. That was huge. But the central banks creating the digital currencies was basically the easy part, okay? But it was distributing the CBDCs, which was the challenge. So this is exactly where Project Rosalind came in. It was kind of a collaboration between the Bank of England and the BIS, which is the Central Bank of Central Banks. This was really the first time in history that we've ever seen like a full-scale test of something like this. They were basically testing to see if they were basically saying like what would it look like when a CBDC flows through APIs, like how does that connectiveness actually look? And Quant came in and they participated in Project Rosalind. They contributed to it. And they basically were able to deliver on some of the requirements that they needed. So a CBDC without an API is like a phone without any apps. Okay? It's like your car's engine without a transmission. It's like electricity without any outlets to plug in. It's like your computer without an operating system, right? Like Windows, like Windows. It would be like a highway without any on and off ramps. You can have that underlying asset, but if there is nobody that can actually connect to it or nobody that can use it, then the CBDC is garbage, right? That asset is garbage. A CBDC on its own is not any type of adoption. It's basically just a ledger, essentially what it is. And what they needed to figure out was, how can applications access the CBDC, right? How can the banks distribute the CBDC? How can wallets integrate in with the CBDC? How can merchants accept the CBDCs? How can fintechs connect to it? How can compliance layers oversee that CBDC? How do cross-border systems interact with that CBDC? That entire layer, that connection layer, that integration layer, that how do we get this into the hands of real people, is exactly what Project Rosalind was built to test. That's why every CBDC conversation eventually comes to Quant's hands, because Quant basically specializes with that solution. So if a CBDC exists, then how do we let the private sector innovate on top of it safely? You know, it wasn't about making a coin. Project Rosalind was about interoperability. It was about programmability. It was about APIs. It was about the user experience of CBDCs. It was about triggering compliance. It was about having secure, trustworthy communication between infrastructures. This was the infrastructure. This was basically the foundation for digital money before anyone can use it. So people think that CBDCs is like a new blockchain. Well, it's really not, right? Central bankers, the BIS, basically view CBDCs as like a brand new means to pay people. It's a brand new payment layer, but it has to be able to plug into everything. So it was huge, right? Project Rosalind. Rosalind it wasn't about one chain. It wasn't about choosing a favorite ledger. It wasn't about picking one layer one. It was about connecting the APIs to it. You know, it was the part of the CBDC system that allows banks, fintechs, merchants, users, applications interact with the CBDC. You needed a way to test like payments. You needed a way to test programmable flows. You needed a way to test conditional payments, right? Just like a smart contract would do. You needed a way to test for like real world use cases or cross ledger communication. You know, they basically were coming in and they were saying, how do we make CBDCs function within the economy? That's pretty much what they were doing. And in order to do that, they needed secure messages. They needed ledger interoperability. They needed auditability. That's exactly what Overledger provided. So Quant didn't build that CBDC. Quant didn't build the central bank ledger. They didn't design the money. Quant basically did exactly what they specialize in. They were able to come in and offer the solution of interoperability and secure messages between all different systems through APIs. Okay? If the Bank of England, when they built the digital pound concept, right, the BIS helped with those frameworks on that experiment. Project Rosalind built this on the basis of APIs, and Quant was basically came in and they were able to orchestrate their interoperability between all of these systems. They had to figure out a way for CBDCs to interact with multiple systems and multiple networks and multiple ledgers and multiple apps. And they had to do that safely. And it was big. It was absolutely big. So the world runs on APIs. I want you guys to understand this. The world runs on APIs, not blockchains. APIs basically can connect banks to apps. APIs can basically connect merchants to a payment processor. Fintechs to a company, or logistics to the supply chain, or governments to service. Your entire digital life is glued together with APIs. And CBDCs also needed APIs. They needed that architecture. Project Rosalind mattered because instead of focusing on the money, they focused on the framework that actually allows the money to move. And this was huge. Project Rosalind was massive. They basically tested anything from micropayments to payments that were basically offline to like atomic settlement conditions. It was huge. And Quant was coming in, and they basically showed that they can work with cross-chain ledgers. They can connect all of these systems, and they can do it in a safe manner without requiring the institutions to adopt one particular blockchain. CBDCs, and I want you guys to understand this, CBDCs are not meant to live on one chain. The same way that stablecoins are not meant to live on one chain. They're meant to live in a multi-system world. And in order for this value to move between all of these different systems, they needed an API to do that. And Overledger was basically came in and solved that for them. And then comes the BIS's Project Meridian. This one was sick too. This one was big, right? Settlement. This one was big. Settlement in FX. I think FX is $7.5 trillion every single day. This one wasn't focused on payments. This one wasn't focused on transfers. This one wasn't focused on messages. It was focused on settlement. It's the actual movement of money between hands, right? Project Meridian came in, and this was, again, it was a joint collaboration between the BIS and the Bank of England. Again, and they were trying to solve one of the oldest problems in finance. So most people think about settlement like you send money and the other person receives it, right? That's how most people think that settlement is. But that's not actually what happens, right? Settlement goes much, much deeper than that. Anytime something has to settle, the banks have to check their balances, right? Payment processors have to send messages and update their ledgers. The central banks then have to update their ledgers. The clearinghouses have to match the debit and the credit of anyone that's actually sending and receiving. The settlement actually occurs days later, as of right now. There's a lot more that goes on beyond settlement than just you send it and I received it. And this is something that's been around since the 1970s. They're still dealing with this shit. The issue that they have with it is that assets and money can move on completely different systems, right? Your house records are on one ledger, and your money sits in a bank ledger, and your stock portfolio sits in a completely different ledger, and your contracts, right? Your any type of contracts that you have, they sit in a completely different ledger. None of them communicate with each other. None of them are interconnected. So when you buy a house, or you want to sell a stock, or you want to execute any FX trades or exchange any collateral, the money moves one way, but the assets actually move in a completely different way. There's two systems, there's two processes, there's multiple ledgers, and it just introduces a lot more risk. It introduces a lot more risk. They call this risk settlement, okay? The risk is executed on one side, and the other side doesn't necessarily see it. So risk settlement, this is a big problem, risk settlement. Risk settlement costs the world's billions of dollars every single year. It costs them billions of dollars every single year. Every bank, every clearinghouse, every trading outpost, every cross-border system, every securities exchange, they all spend massive amounts of money trying to prevent one side of the transaction from executing without the other side. And that was a big point that Project Meridian came in and was built to fix. So Project Meridian comes in, and they were basically saying, like, what if money and assets could settle together at the same moment, even if they lived on fragmented ledgers, even if they lived in different ledgers? That's exactly what delivery versus payment is, right? DVP. DVP means that you get the asset only if the money moves. And the seller gets their money only if that asset is transferred. And both of them happen at the exact same time, or it doesn't happen at all. It's one of the biggest problems in finance, because if money lives on a central bank ledger, and assets live on a completely separate ledger, and contracts live on a completely separate ledger, and FX lives in a completely separate ledger, and the banks operate within their own internal systems, how do you sync all of those ledgers together in real time with zero risk across multiple ledgers that don't even speak the same language. How do you do that? How do you do that? It's a big problem. How do you solve that settlement risk? Right? You need a coordinator. You need a conductor. You need some sort of orchestration. You need a way for them to come out and say, trigger this asset movement the exact millisecond that the money movement finalizes. The second that money comes in, that asset is moving. That's not a blockchain problem. That's an interoperability problem. Okay? That's a cross-ledger synchronization problem. And that's where Quant comes in and shines. Project Meridian was testing models where buyers' funds were held in one ledger and an asset like real estate or a security was held in a different ledger. And both sides had to confirm finality before any value was actually moved. Money won't unlock unless that asset is received, right? The assets won't unlock unless the money is received. And they couldn't have it done manually. It needed to be automated. It had to be triggered. It had to be programmable and had to be orchestrated. And it had to happen in seconds. And there was a lot of things that came into it. And what they needed to do in order to fulfill that is a lot of things that Quant solves, right? Cross-ledger messaging, atomic settlement, secure communication between them, multi-system flows, right? Trusted orchestration, programmable logic. That's what Overledger is exactly designed for. They're not trying to run a ledger. They're trying to connect all of these fragmented layers. They're not trying to replace the existing systems, but they're trying to build them together. And most blockchains can't do that. You know, most blockchains are fucking walled gardens. Their interoperability solutions only connect to ecosystems that are pretty similar to theirs. When you look at like the real world, the real financial ecosystem, you have Corda's ledgers, you have central banks RTGS ledgers, you have Hyperledger networks, government property ledgers, you have private DLT networks, public blockchains, commercial bank systems. There's a ton of different technologies out there, but nothing matches up, nothing lines up, and nothing is speaking the same language. So Meridian came in and they asked, how do we coordinate the settlement between a central bank system, an asset ledger, and a workflow engine? Most blockchains couldn't even apply. They couldn't do that if they tried, but Quant could. Quant could, because Quant's Overledger allows the communication between different ledgers. It allows the connection to legacy systems. It allows logic to communicate between different systems. It ensures that it ensures like you have this atomic settlement between all of these platforms. It can execute. It can execute once certain conditions are met. Right. It is certainly compliant. It certainly doesn't need a new chain. It certainly doesn't need complete recoding of the financial system. It's settlement at the architectural layer, not at the blockchain layer. I don't know if that was a little bit much, but it was big. This was an absolute big one. And then we're going to get into the Regulated Liability Network. Boy, oh boy. I love this one. R3 Corda and the Regulated Liability Network. Wow. This one was big. Okay. Up until now, we talked about banks and we talked about different countries and we talked about enterprises and we talked about central banks. You know, and each part of those systems had their own problems, right? Banks wanted blockchains that could be adopted without having to change their underlying technology, right? Regions wanted to connect to each other without fragmentation. Enterprises wanted blockchain without the complexity, right? Central banks wanted to digitize money without the complexity or without the chaos. The CBDCs, they needed APIs to function in the real world. And assets needed synchronization between them so that they could settle. But up until now, this is the one initiative that kind of brings everything into a coordinated infrastructure, right? The Regulated Liability Network, the RLN. And I'm going to tell you why the RLN was so fucking massive. Because if the world goes the direction that the BIS thinks that it's going to, the RLN is the early version of the new financial system. That's why paying attention to this is so important. And Quant is a part of it, okay? So here's the problem. Here is the problem. Money is fragmented right now, right? We have many different means of money, and they exist in completely different forms, right? You have cash, you have e-money, you have stablecoins, you have commercial bank deposits, central bank reserves, you have tokenized deposits, you have CBDCs, you have credit card networks. There's different means of money, right? And all of those, they use different ledgers. All of those, they have different rules. They have different technologies. They all have different legal frameworks. That is the definition of fragmentation. It's fragmented. And that fragmentation makes the settlement very slow, okay? It makes the liquidity fragmented. It makes the cross-border transactions very expensive. There's a lot of risk to manage, and programmability on that level is pretty much fucking impossible. You know, and the banks know that. The regulators know that. The central bankers know that. Money's digital, okay? But the systems that move it, they're not unified. They don't work with each other. Well, here comes the Regulated Liability Network, okay? The RLN comes in and they asks a very simple question. They come in and they basically say, what if all regulated forms of money could live on one shared, secure platform while still being legally separated? Right? What if all regulated forms of money could live on one shared, secure platform while still being legally separated? That does not mean one chain. That does not mean one ledger. That does not mean one currency, right? It means stablecoins and cash and collateral and commercial bank deposits could all exist within one shared infrastructure where they can settle instantly, where they can have interoperability, where the compliance is automatic. This is the idea of the unified ledger that the Bank of International Settlements talks about. And the Regulated Liability Network was the first real attempt at actually creating the prototype for the Bank of International Settlements unified ledger. If that does come into fruition, you better figure out what assets are hosting CBDCs. What assets are hosting tokenized bank deposits? What assets are hosting stablecoins? You better figure out what assets are damn near instant settlement. What assets have programmability? What assets have compliance? You better figure that out, because if the BIS's unified ledger does come into existence and your assets don't have that, you're out of the system. You are completely out of the system. And I think the Regulated Liability Network, and in the United States, they have something called the RSN, the Regulated Settlement Network. But the Regulated Liability Network, there was a couple of different experiments within it, right? The UK's version was basically including commercial banks and regulators and central banks participated in it. And then Quant came in. Quant and R3 Corda came in. The UK the UK's regulated liability network basically needed a ledger, right? And an interface where programmability and interoperability was baked into the solution. And for that ledger, they selected R3. Okay, it's a system that's already trusted by banks. But for the programmability that will actually make the regulated liability network run, they selected Quant. So they needed the ledger and they needed the programmable logic layer for that. For the networks, in order for the networks to someday get upgraded into digital infrastructure for regulated money in Britain, they chose Quant for that to provide that orchestration, that programmability for it. That's not fucking normal. That's not fucking normal. That's not something you see on the news. Quant didn't get added into the regulated liability network to experiment. Quant got added as a core technology provider. So R3 Corda is the ledger, right? It holds the accounts, it stores the money. But Quant is the actual brain of the operation. It actually allows the ability to run programmable applications. It can synchronize transactions. It can orchestrate money. It handles the APIs. It makes the platform multi-ledger. It ensures interoperability with existing systems. It was huge. And without Quant, the regulated liability network was still as fragmented as it ever was. So with Quant, the regulated liability network became programmable. It became interoperable. It became connected. And that's exactly what the fucking banks needed. This wasn't about one chain beating another. This wasn't about picking a layer one. This wasn't about earning yield on DeFi. This wasn't about marketing partnerships or a token launch. It was about how does the world move regulated money in 10, 15 years. Not just CBDCs, but all forms of regulated digital money. Tokenized deposits, stablecoins, fiat, all of them. How do they do that in one connected system? If they could figure that out, that's the holy grail of modernizing the financial system. And then Quant was a part of the group, building one of the earliest versions for that idea of the unified ledger. They needed programmability. You know, like people, we get a little nervous with stablecoins and CBDCs because programmability means that they can do what they want with your money. But it's coming, whether you like it or not. You know, it is. You know, it's one thing to, as retail, we believe in this idea that crypto is going to be democratized, and it's, you know, la 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 la. But pay attention to what the banks are doing. You know, what do the banks want? What is the regulated liability network requiring? Well, they want scheduled payments. If they're going to have scheduled payments, there has to be programmability. If they want automated settlement, there has to be programmability. If there is going to be a means to control the liquidity, there has to be a means to program that. If they want a way to move money across different rails, they need a way to program that. There has to be programmability. This is what they're requiring. Don't you think you should figure out if your asset has the means for programmable money? Because if not, you're going to miss out on something. It was big. This is programmable money at an institutional level. Not no fucking retail DeFi bullshit. You know, you're looking at programmable loans, programmable collateral, programmable business payments, programmable cross-border flows. All under banking regulations. This was big. Crypto is not replacing banks. Sorry to break your heart. It's not. Crypto is here to upgrade the banks. It is. The banks and the central banks needed a shared digital infrastructure for all forms of money. And this is the transition coming from the BIS, coming from the International Monetary Fund, coming at the central banks. This is that transition of our financial system that they keep hinting at. It's a multi-asset, it's a multi-ledger, it's a unified settlement system. That's what the future is. And the Regulated Liability Network is the door for that. And Quant is one of the only technologies that's sitting inside of that fucking door. Pay attention to this one. Okay? Here comes AUCloud and some of the government infrastructures. Okay? This is where blockchain meets government-grade national security. Think about all the things that we've gone over, right? We've gone over things from the banks needing a means to connect to each other, to countries needing a means to connect to each other, to central banks needing safe digital money, to CBDCs needing APIs, to banks and central banks needing a shared digital infrastructure. And Quant solves that. And now we're going to go into national security for governments. And do you think that Quant has something to do with that? Oh my God. Regions, banks, enterprises, central banks, CBDCs. But now we go into something very different. Government grade security. Okay? This is something completely outside of the world of crypto. This is something outside of the world of trading. This is something that's outside of enterprises trying to modernize their payment flows. This is a world where national defense systems operate. This is a world where government agencies are running. This is a world where public data is stored. This is a world where critical information is even protected. And this is where failure isn't an option. It's not an option. This is where AUCloud comes in. Okay. The difference between I don't even know if I should get into cloud computing for you guys or cloud storage. It might be too much. But most companies use cloud services, okay, like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, and they're good for most things, right? They're flexible, they're popular, but the governments they can't use those platforms for most of their sensitive information. Why? Why can't governments use AWS or Google Cloud? It's because there's data sovereignty requirements, right? There's national security policies. There's disaster recovery plans. There's jurisdictional risks. There's classified information. Governments need a cloud infrastructure that's controlled, that's audited, that's operated inside of their own countries under their own laws, that's approved and vetted and have government level compliance. So this is what a sovereign cloud is. Okay, it's not like your retail Amazon Web Services, but that's basically what a sovereign cloud is. So AUCloud is one of Australia's sovereign cloud providers. They're basically providing solutions for government agencies, defense organizations, power grids, water utilities, critical infrastructure, healthcare networks, cybersecurity. You get the picture. Governments are starting to explore blockchain technology. We know that. But they're starting to explore blockchain technology for secure data, to exchange secure data, to exchange assets, asset tracking, or digital identity. That's a massive one. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, they need to do it in an environment that meets the same safety requirements as the core infrastructure. So, boom, here comes Quant. Here comes Quant, right? AUCloud basically needed a secure DLT platform with very strict permissioning, right? That kind of guards who has access to it, who's allowed in there, who's not allowed in there. It's a very specific requirement that almost no blockchains can meet. Okay, because most blockchains are public. Most blockchains are fragmented. Most blockchains are unpermissioned. Open source. We're open source. Most of them are anonymous, and most of them are unpredictable. But governments can't use that. Healthcare providers can't use that. Banks can't use that. You know what they need? They need consistency. They need predictability. They need stability. They certainly need compliance. And they need control. But Overledger, Quant's Overledger, is not a blockchain. Overledger is an operating system for connecting different chains. And you know what that operating system is perfect for? Connecting government systems. Connecting private DLT solutions. It's perfect for bringing in cloud infrastructure with blockchain. It's perfect for that. It's perfect for supporting high security, permissioned networks. It's perfect for allowing governments to use blockchain without rewriting their systems. And that's why AUCloud partnered with Quant Network. Because it wasn't a crypto partnership. This was an infrastructure deployment. So what are they actually doing, right? What is AUCloud and Quant Network actually building together? They basically built like a government-ready, a sovereign cloud-based blockchain. Okay, powered by Overledger. That means that any government agency in Australia can utilize a DLT network. They can run secure payment flows. They can manage digital identities. They can connect to different DLTs. They can test digital asset infrastructure. And they could do it in a safe means that doesn't put the government at risk. They could do it all on a sovereign cloud provider. It allowed the government, the Australian government, to move data and information through a cloud with DLT technology. They were able to adopt DLT technology without risking any information. That's governmental adoption. That's governmental adoption. Everything that will be sent through this cloud, the information on there could be health records, citizens' identities, registrations for land, your government benefits. It could be licenses. It could be documents. It could be any type of critical information that they're monitoring. All powered by DLT technology in a way that meets some of the biggest restrictions from a government. And then here comes Overledger. Here comes Overledger making that possible. When a government is experimenting with blockchain inside of a sovereign cloud infrastructure, they're not experimenting with tokens. Okay? And this may be something that's difficult for many people to understand. They're not trying to figure out what has the best yield. They're not competing with Bitcoin. They're preparing to modernize the government's national systems that cannot fail, that cannot be at risk. That's the type of adoption that most crypto projects can never touch. You think most crypto projects can do this? Safe, with no risk and uptime? Governments aren't ever going to touch something that's unstable. They're never going to touch something that is controlled by anonymous validators. I'm going to piss some Bitcoin people off. Yeah, no, they're never going to integrate in with something that is controlled by unanimous validators. Nope, sorry. They're never going to integrate with something that can be hacked, that can shut down, that can run by unpredictable governance. Hedera, I guess, right? They're not going to run with something that is not compliant, and they're certainly not going to run with something that doesn't meet defense standards, the country's defense standards. Quant is one of the only DLT infrastructure providers that can step into this because of Overledger. Because Overledger is secure, it's permissioned, it's compliance orchestrated, it is focused on interoperability, it's enterprise grade and government friendly. It's middleware. That's exactly what it is. This is the type of technology that doesn't trend on Twitter because most people don't even know what the fuck a cloud provider is. They certainly aren't looking into this. They read this and they think, well, I don't know what the fuck that means. Okay, I guess that's cool. Most people, this is the type of technology that most people will never fucking look into. But they don't realize how massive it is to provide governmental infrastructure and to do it and to be trusted by them. I don't know how many different interoperability solutions I showed you tonight for Quant. Banking rails, countries, enterprises, central banks, CBDC APIs, asset settlements, unified regulated money, and now government infrastructure. We're not talking about payments. We're not talking about assets. We're not talking about banks. We're talking about government records. We're talking about national databases. We're talking about sovereign identity systems. We're talking about cybersecurity workflows, defense level infrastructure. This is where adoption is coming. Not from financial institutions. We focus a lot on the banks. But we're looking at national infrastructure right now. And they're integrating in with blockchain technology. Don't you think you want to figure out what blockchains can integrate in with healthcare? Can integrate in with defense? That can integrate in with with governments? Because they're exploring blockchain development and adoption. And once blockchain becomes embedded in these sovereign systems, it's not going to get replaced. You know how governments move. Once something works, it works. They don't ever change it. Once this gets implemented in, it's not going to get replaced. It will become the backbone for, I don't know, decades. Decades. And this is where Quant comes in, right? Because Quant starts to look less like a crypto project and look more like a infrastructure provider. I keep telling you guys all the time, know the difference between settlement and infrastructure. Please. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. Now here. Corda and Hyperledger. Ooh, the blockchains that run the real financial world. Yep. This is my last this is my absolute last tab, so I'm going to be opening up the panel in just a little bit, but I have to get through this one because this one is just as big. Most people in crypto, they're focused on TPS, gas fees, which layer ones are going to be the king, what chain gets the next winning meme coin. I'm sorry, you fucking neckbone. What are you paying attention to? What are you paying attention to? The real adoption, the real blockchain adoption, the adoption that actually matters to banks and institutions and governments is happening on a completely different set of platform. Hyperledger and Corda. They're not retail chains. They're not public networks. They're not DeFi playgrounds. These are blockchains that run quietly inside of banks and insurance companies and stock exchanges and regulators and supply chains and government agencies. The infrastructure that Quant was built for, right? So let's walk through it a little bit. Most people think that blockchain is like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana and XRP and HBAR. And when they imagine blockchain, they think of tokens and wallets and NFTs and automated market makers and staking and gas fees. But institutions don't see it that way. How are you supposed to invest if it's not public? I think you should figure out which ones of these are looking into blockchains, right? Which ones of these are working with the ones that you can invest into? But institutions are not thinking like retail. They're not thinking of wallets and tokens and automated market maker and stakings. They can't. They can't think like that because it's not compliant. None of that is controllable. It's not predictable. They certainly can't audit that type of shit. You know what the banks need? The banks need identity. They need permissioning. They need stable governance. They need compliance. They need uptime. They need privacy. That's why years ago you had players like R3 Corda and IBM and JP Morgan and Accenture. They built enterprise blockchains that were for permissioned DLTs. And two of the biggest of them is Hyperledger and Corda. And these networks, between these two, they already power trade finance. They already power digital assets. They already power supply chains. They already power identity systems. And the biggest thing about them is that they were never meant to replace public chains. Did you get that one? They were never meant to replace public chains. The ones you can invest in. They were never there to compete with them. They were meant to complement them. Okay? But they have some limitations, all right? They're not built to talk to each other. They're built completely different than one another. And that creates an issue of interoperability for institutions that are using them. Thank you so much for the follow. For institutions that want to settle with CBDCs. Institutions that want to use tokenized deposits. For institutions that want to adopt stablecoins. For institutions that want to tokenize securities. It creates a problem with them. It creates a problem for the institutions that want to integrate in with the unified ledger standards coming from the BIS. So who do you think fits that architecture of that interoperability? Thank you. Quant isn't just compatible with Hyperledger and Corda. It was built for them. Right? Most blockchains and crypto, they're trying to replace institutional systems. How many times have you heard that? Right? Oh, we're going to replace the banks. I don't know. I think the ones that are going to be the most successful are the ones that are complementing them. But Quant is not here to replace the banks. Quant was designed to connect the institutions together. Okay? Since Quant is interoperable, it connects to different ledgers, it's API driven, it's compliant, enterprise friendly, it allows it to connect and speak to Hyperledger, to Corda, to public chains, to private chains, to banking systems, to cloud systems. That's huge. Quant is quite literally the operating system that lets private DLTs connect to public networks, and public networks connect to private DLTs without forcing anyone to switch or change anything. And we've seen a lot of adoption from Hyperledger with traditional finance. Because it's stable, because it's predictable, because it's governed, because it's secure. That's what institutions want, right? But Hyperledger on its own is isolated. Hyperledger on its own cannot connect to public chains. It can't communicate with CBDC rails. It can't interact with private ledgers. Can't run multi-ledger smart contracts. It needs a bridge. It needs orchestration and needs interoperability. Overledger provides that. Banks love Corda, right? We've seen that. Corda is probably one of the most institutionally adopted blockchains in the world. And banks are using it because they can have OTC derivatives. They can have bond issuance, collateral management, trade finance, settlement, tokenization projects. Corda is not a chain. It's more like a secure digital database with blockchain type properties. But again, Corda can not. Corda's in isolation as well. It's an island. It can't talk to public chains. It can't talk to Hyperledger. It can't talk to tokenized asset platforms, CBDC rails. None of that. Again, it's another island. But Overledger solves that. Overledger is the system that opens that island. Opens that island to everything else. So, besides the interoperability that I showed all of you guys, Quant comes in and does something very different. All these other chains, they're saying, build with us. Build with us. Quant's saying that you don't need to build with us. We'll just connect everything that you already have to everything else. Other chains are saying, fuck their ecosystem. Switch into our ecosystem. Quant is coming in and saying, keep that shit. We'll bridge it to something else. We'll bridge it to everything else. Other chains are coming in and saying, rewrite your entire system. Let's upgrade you. But Quant's coming in saying, you don't need to upgrade anything. Just plug it in. We'll just figure out how to plug it into the existing systems. That is institutional mindset. That is a banking mindset. That's a governmental mindset. That's why Overledger fits into Hyperledger and Corda. Quant doesn't compete with these platforms. It just connects them. Most people are thinking that they're trying to figure out what blockchain is going to win. But if it doesn't connect, it's not going to win. Not at all. The future of blockchain is there's going to be some public chains, there's going to be some private chains, there's going to be some government chains, there's going to be some bank-led systems, there's going to be some tokenized markets, there's going to be some CBDC platforms. Right? We're seeing that adoption. There's going to be all different types of shit out there. But all of them will communicate to each other. All of them will synchronize in with each other. All of them will be able to coordinate with one another through an operating system, through an orchestration layer. It's not one chain to rule them all. It's one connective layer that unifies them together. And I believe Quant is that network. Hyperledger and Corda are the environments that certainly need that interoperability alone. Guys, we went into a ton of shit tonight. We went into Quant and the banking rails, the country's interoperability needs, the enterprise's interoperability needs, the central bank's interoperability needs, the CBDC API interoperability needs, the settlement interoperability needs, the unified ledger, the regulated liability networks, unified interoperability needs, government, cloud, and critical infrastructure needs. And now, when we go into Hyperledger and Corda, we see the institutional needs. It's absolutely massive. It's absolutely massive. This is 14.8 million coins. That's it. That's it. If you look at everything that I presented for you tonight, and you're not interested in this, good luck, brother. You may see something I don't see. You might see something I certainly don't see. Don't take it personal, but I see something. I see a gem here. I see an absolute gem. We went through like 10 different floors of a building. We went through almost 10 different floors of a fucking building tonight. And I want you to kind of just take a step back and look at it as one picture, right? Because we went through banking rails, enterprise integration, CBDC. We went through a lot of stuff. But they're pillars. All of these are relevant. They're pillars to the new financial system. And Quant isn't trying to fit into them, but Quant is connecting them. So once you see this, you're never going to look at the space the same. You never will. All those systems we just talked about, the systems that actually move the world's money, not in the crypto world, not in the retail trading world, not in the speculative exchange world, but I'm talking about the actual plumbing of global economy, and the deeper that you go, the more obvious it becomes. Quant is not playing a game as the rest of the cryptos are. Quant isn't fighting over ecosystems. It's building infrastructure. Someone just said Ripple, settlement versus infrastructure, brother. All the ecosystems need a means to connect to each other, right? That's why the tokenomics look so different. That's why architecture looks different. That's why the partnerships look different. Quant doesn't need your hype. It just needs integration, and that's exactly what it's getting. Every institution at the same level of the financial system is hitting the same wall. How do we bring blockchain or digital assets into our world without breaking compliance? And every time, no matter what that environment was, whether it was Europeans' banking rails or Latin America's government's DLT exploring, or enterprise cloud, or central bank currency experiments, or retail CBDC distributions, or asset settlement engines, or tokenized money networks, the answer to that kept landing on the same need. They need interoperability without disruption to the current system. Think about how rare that is. You have governments, you have banks, you have central banks, enterprises, all of them arriving at the same conclusion. We can't rip out what we already have. We need to connect what we already have to what they're trying to build. And Quant is one of the only technologies engineered perfectly for that job. It's not a one chain to rule them all. It's not going to be one ecosystem that becomes the standard. Nope. There's not going to be a world of where it's either Solana or Ethereum or XRP or HBAR is going to run the entire financial system. No. Nope. That vision died the moment that the central banks and institutions entered in. The real money, the multi-rail, the multi-ledger, the multi-network, that's the moment that it died. It's not going to be one blockchain to rule them all, but many systems that specialize in their own things that can solve a problem. All of those, they need a way to communicate with each other. It's the connective tissue. It's that interoperability layer. That's what Quant is. It's not replacing anything. It's not competing with anything. It's not fragmenting anything. It's connecting everything. That's what Quant is building. Well, that's what Quant already built, already tested, already deployed, already integrated, already validated. Not in crypto labs, not in DeFi protocols, not in the NFT marketplace. No. They did that in banks. They did that in governments. They did that in enterprises and payment networks and settlement systems and national governmental infrastructures. People look at Quant and they think, oh, it's just a token. $100 a token is fucking expensive, right? Come on, 100 of them, I'd be lucky if I can get 10. But Quant is not a token it in the way that people are thinking of tokens. Quant is a license key. Okay? It's literally the way that enterprises and institutions and developers access Overledger. In order for them to run production inside of Overledger, the licenses have to lock QNT. It has to remove QNT out of circulation. The more systems that are connected, the more licenses are locked. The more licenses are locked, the less the circulating supply. The less the circulating supply, the more pressure on the price. That's what makes Quant the opposite of an inflationary or speculative tokenomics. Quant is not a reward token. It's not a gas fee. It's not a staking token. It's not a governance token. No, it's a utility license. It's a utility license that gets locked up by institutional usage. Every integration we walked through today, the Regulated Liability Network, Project Rosalind, the digital pound, the Oracle, LACChain, the SIA Nexi, AUCloud, Hyperledger, Corda. Every one of these is a potential generator for a demand in that license. So when I say Quant is going to probably be one of the most explosive tokens in the history of the world, let alone that it's 14.8 million coins, look at all the adoptions that they have. Not even that, but that it's a license fee. Look around. Most projects people are trying to buy are like, we're trying to attract retail, right? We're trying to build an ecosystem that people can, build meme coins on. We're trying to get developers to build on our chain. You fucking moron. Quant is doing something completely opposite. It's embedding itself in a foundational layer that's the next global financial system. You're not looking at adoption, you're looking at integration. They're integrating in with Overledger. You're looking at systems. You're looking at networks. You're looking at institutions, at governments, at critical infrastructure. You're looking at unified ledgers. All require interoperability to function in this multi-ledger world. And Quant is in the middle. Look at this. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll try to blow this up for you. Future of Finance. They rewarded Quant as the best programmable payment platform. You want to take a bet? Look, Circle, JP Morgan, Visa. There's Quant. You want to take a bet on what is going to be integrated in? This is a bet. This is a bet on inevitability. Inevitability of interoperability coming into the system. This is a bet on the transformation of global infrastructure. It's a bet on the architecture. It's a bet that everything is going to connect to each other. That's the kind of bets that don't need memes. They don't need influencers. They don't need sellout influencers that are going to fucking push a project. You know what it needs? It needs time. Because infrastructure adoption doesn't move in days. It moves in stages and it moves in phases. It's quiet at first and then all of a sudden it's fucking there. And that's where Quant is, I believe. It's embedding into these systems. Hopefully you guys knew about some of these systems before I brought them up. If not, hopefully you learned at least one thing new. But I am here to show you that they are embedding into a multitude of systems. And these are the systems that once the institutions actually move into production and they start to use tokenized money and the CBDCs are actually going live and the settlement becomes programmable, that demand for the licensing layer, the demand for QNT, is going to be unlike the demand for any other crypto project out there. That's why I believe QNT is going to be one of the most explosive tokens in the history of the world. 14.8 million coins, and they have to have an annual license. Holding it